Welcome to Health Oddity, the show that strips away the jargon and hype surrounding all things health and fitness to help you live a long, strong and energetic life. Lining up at the bar this week, here's Peter Lant, Paul Bassett and James St. Pierre.
Hello and welcome to the Health Oddity podcast, episode 149. We are getting very close to episode 150 and obviously officially episode what would it be? 156 would actually be our third birthday, I think.
Roundabout, yeah.
Is that 3 times 52? 156, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. So yeah, we will be exactly 3 years old soon. We have a lovely run of guests again coming up, including a lovely guest today who I will introduce you to in a minute. But first of all, in fact, no, before I go to the hosts, the hosts and have an update, I would say, I'll tell you now, the guest we have on today is Mr. Chris Branch. This is part 2 of the podcast we're doing with him. So if you have not listened to episode 145, which is just, 4 episodes ago, you really need to listen to that first before this, because this is a direct continuation on from episode 145. So before getting too deep into this one, if you haven't listened to episode 145, which was called Training to Run 100 Miles with Chris Branch, please go back and listen to 145. And this is episode 149. But before we get talking to Chris, let me introduce us to and touch base with Mr. Peter Lant. How are you doing, Peter?
I'm doing very well. Thank you very much. That's all I've got to report. It's a bit of a boring week this week. It's funny because when it's nice weather and it's really sunny and that, it's too warm sometimes to go out with the boy later on. So basically I've done all my walking and all that sort of stuff that I need to do for today. So so it's nice to be able to do this actually.
So you've got a nice relaxing, afternoon ahead.
Well, I wouldn't say that, but it changes my days around, which is really interesting because I usually have a few hours in the afternoon to take him for a walk, which is great. But when it's too hot, I have to do it in the morning, like I say. So it moves my day around, and it makes it feel a bit strange in the beginning, to be honest. But it's how it goes, isn't it?
Yeah, you adapt, and you've got lovely weather down in Bath. And who was it that was playing a concert last weekend at out the back of your house?
Oh, that was Pub in the Park. So it was McFly, who aren't the ones who aren't busted. That's McFly.
Yeah,
I've been reliably informed. It was who else? Bjorn again. Judge Judy was playing. Example. Badly Drawn Boy was playing as well.
Oh, that's cool.
But we were out walking the dog when he was on, so we missed that. And then Gabrielle was on in the evening, on the Sunday. So it was.
So can you literally sit in your garden and just listen to that?
We tried to. Sean wanted to listen to McFly on Saturday night, so we went out there. But there's a tennis club behind my house. When I moved in here in 2008, it's a tennis club and a bowling green, right? It's evolved now. In the summer, it's a beach bar, right?
Okay.
So, and we're in Bath, nowhere near the beach, but in the summer, they import sand and everything, and it's a beach bar. So it's full of people, and it's quite noisy. And then in the winter, it's an ice rink. So we sat out there on Saturday, and McFly were playing further over in the park on that. So it was basically we had a mix of the two, just noise. We were just sitting in the back garden, there was just noise. So no.
Okay. Mr. Paul Bassett, how are you doing?
Used to watch Judge Judy.
Yeah, she's a DJ now.
Yeah, she's DJ now.
Did you say, was it Judge Jules he said? I kind of missed out. Yeah, not Judge Judy. Okay.
Judge Judy and Executioner, as they say.
Yeah.
No one knows the Hot Fuzz reference? Oh, come on, guys.
Yes, I haven't seen that film for a long, long time though. But yeah.
It's on, isn't it on like every other week? There's certain films and TV shows that are constantly on. The Hobbit. I don't know if they bought like a 10-year license to show it every week, but The Hobbit is always on.
Oh.
Notice? You don't watch TV, do you, James?
I watch what I want to watch, so I kind of go to what I want to watch. I never flick channels or see what's on. So no, I'm afraid not.
You're a man who knows what he wants and goes and gets it.
Exactly.
There's no need to flick. There's no need to flick channels anymore, is
That's
there?
what I mean. I haven't got
yeah,
time for. I haven't got time for channel surfing. I know what I want to watch, and I get to it. Okay. Anyway, welcome, Paul.
Welcome. Yes.
Welcome, Pete.
Indeed.
Right, Chris. So Chris Branch, and we're not going to go through the whole origin story again. You will have only listened to this a few weeks ago. And we are now, it was actually kind of the way that it turned out, the day that we actually published or broadcast or released the podcast, episode 145, that Chris was on before, was on the Friday. And then Chris was actually going for his 100-mile spiritual adventure on the Saturday, so the very next day. So we are joined today by Chris, and we promised on the last episode, and we did actually have some really good feedback, and quite a few people spoke to me and said, wow, I really enjoyed that. That was really interesting. I'm looking forward to part 2. So part 2 is here. So I'm not really sure how we're going to unpack this and what direction. And Chris is, we've not really spoke to Chris about it. So we're just going to kind of see how we go. But initially, Chris, I suppose the floor is yours. What happened? How did the day start? Just talk to us, and we can kind of ask questions as we go.
Yeah, cool. So the spoiler alert is the day didn't go to plan, and I didn't make it to 100 miles. So what was curious about the day at the very beginning, my gut didn't feel right. So the race starts at 6 a.m. I had camped at the start line the night before, woke up feeling generally okay and excited for the run. And I've done 2 other ultras this year and I've practiced diligently my nutrition strategy, my pace strategy, and I felt confident with both of them. And one of my pieces of nutrition strategy is that I start taking on calories 15 minutes into the race, just little bits of real food and gels. And I aim to take on about 400 calories an hour. That's gone really well in the previous 2 races. But the first bit of calories I started to take on, it just didn't pass through me. It felt like a brick in my stomach. And I thought, right, maybe this is because I have only relatively recently had breakfast with an early start. Maybe I just need to kind of slow down my running a bit, let breakfast pass through, I'll be fine. And then it just never passed. And gradually it became more and more of an issue where I just couldn't get food in me. It just wouldn't literally get past my stomach. And by about 20 miles, I couldn't take on any food. By about 35 miles, I was even retching, taking on sips of water. And there was an aid station at 35 miles. That was the worst I've ever felt in any run ever. And I came into this race quite confident. And I in the last episode, I was saying to you guys that really this is going to be a game of 2 halves, about 70, 80 miles. That's my physical challenge. And then 20, 30 miles into the nighttime, that's going to be my mental kind of spiritual type challenge. But at 20 miles, I was like, oh my God, this is not what I was expecting today. And by 35, I'd felt the worst I'd ever felt. There was another aid station 11 miles away. So I did leave the 35-mile aid station hoping for the tide to turn, because what everyone says about ultra running is you just go through these big waves. And I was just hoping that this tide would turn, and it never did. So I left 35 miles feeling the worst I've ever felt in a race, hoping for it to go up, and it just got progressively worse. And I got to the point at 46 miles where I actually kind of staggered in a little bit, and I wasn't delirious, but I was just I wasn't able to kind of barely even walk, let alone run. It was 31 degrees. If you can't take on water in that temperature, my goal during the day gradually kind of kept changing, and it started off as a sub 24 goal in terms of time, and I kept downgrading it to the point where my goal became don't die. Just when you hear of bad things happening to people in the ultra world, it tends to be on very hot days, and I just wasn't trying to do anything stupid out there. So I felt horrendous and made the decision to stop at 46 miles. So what was weird was it was nutritional. It was a physiological stop. My physical body felt fine. I wasn't injured. I woke up the next day feeling completely fine in my physical body. I felt tired. I felt thirsty. I felt hungry. But the 46 miles of running wasn't the problem. It was the inability to get calories in, because I mean, I can't remember what my Garmin said. I think in that 46 miles, I used about 6,500 calories. And if you can't replace anywhere near the 6,000 calories, then it's just a problem. So that's kind of what drew an end to it, unfortunately.
And you're a very sort of tall, lean person as well, aren't you? So you don't have lots of reserves and things to tap. You know, I mean, it's to tap into your.
So first of all, I don't have a huge amount of fat reserves, but I always say to people, when you're choosing a nutrition strategy, you just have to pick one. You can become fat adapted. You can become keto. In fact, there's a chap I follow on Instagram called the Low Carb Runner, and he is completely fat adapted. He actually recently was the first ever person to run a 0-calorie 100-mile. So he did it just on water and electrolytes. And but over a long period of time, he's become fat adapted. I have gone keto in the past, but it just didn't really work for me for a few reasons. So when I say to people, you have to pick one, you can run fat adapted and you can teach your body to gain energy from its fat stores, but I'd picked the other one. So even though I probably have some fat tissue in my body that it could have used, that's not the strategy I've been training on. My body was expecting carbs, and because I'd given it some carbs through the race, it was expecting carbs. I needed to keep giving it carbs. That was the strategy, and I couldn't. So
why would you choose one over the other?
I'll be honest. When I went keto, this is maybe an interesting conversation. This happened to me on strict paleo as well. I couldn't poo. So I found that both strict paleo and strict keto, I got ridiculously lean, looked pretty good, but I didn't have great energy and I didn't have good digestion. So no matter what people write about, I'm a big fan of Mark Sisson, big fan of, whenever I read someone who's on keto, I'm like, yeah, it makes sense to me. In reality, it just doesn't work for me. So then when I start to bring in some whole grains, I have oats for breakfast, lots more vegetable-based carbohydrates, I just feel really good. And I just keep coming back to the conclusion that no one diet works for anyone, and you have to find what works for you. So for me as an individual, I've tried keto, and I was super strict. I became fat adapted over a few months, but never during that few months did I feel great like they say you should.
Well, you'll be fat adapted because of the way you train. So you'll be accessing your aerobic system as the predominant driver of your training, as we discussed on the last podcast, rather than the anaerobic system, which is, that fast twitch, very sugar orientated. Because you can only carry so many calories in the bloodstream before it becomes poisonous when it comes to sugar.
I guess, yeah, it's a good point. We're maybe reaching the edge of my expertise here. I'm not a nutrition expert, but I've tried to pick up enough. So I think that's why you need to just keep using it. Maybe in lay terms of what it feels like when I'm running ultras. I have a friend who calls it the incinerator theory. He's an ultra runner. So bringing it back to kind of conceptual ideas. When you run an ultra, it really feels like you're an incinerator. You can just put anything in and it gets used, and you can eat anything. And at first, when you start running, it can feel a bit heavy on the stomach, but once you've been running 30 miles, you just want that food, and it just disappears. You incinerate it. That's what it feels like when you're feeling good. And on that day, I just wasn't feeling good. So I know what you're saying about your blood sugar. You can only hold so much, but when you are also so active during an ultra, it just seems to get used. And
when you're, I know what you mean. When you're doing that ultra and you are constantly topping up with gels and flapjacks and bananas, and you're constantly.
Well, that's the challenge, though, isn't it? Because depending on how many calories you can carry, so say you're always topping up and you're hitting your maximum number, you're always going to be limited by that store, rather than the 100,000 calories that you store in terms of body fat.
That's true,
I
yeah.
mean, a lot of people who aren't fat adapted will hit that wall. I think Americans call it bonking, but it's the wall where, say 17 miles into a marathon or something like that, your body says, no, we can't access energy at the pace that you want. I suppose the key is that you don't have you don't have that taper off of performance as the progression of, as you close to the second half of a race. A lot of the very fat adapted individuals or the very high level people will pick up pace as they go. But what happens to the majority of people is they get to like mile 17, let's just take the marathon, and then their body just says, look, we can't access as much fuel here at the pace you want to keep going. So I'm going to, it goes back to that central governor theory, whether or not you believe that, but the central governor just says, okay, shut you down. We can't keep up this pace demanding the energy that you require because we can't access it at this pace. And then the big challenge you have as an ultra runner is how do you keep the calorie intake and manage gastrointestinal response and distress, etc., versus the output you want. And I suppose that's one of the theories of being more fat adapted is you're less likely to have the gastrointestinal distress because you don't have to go through the digestive process constantly while you're doing the race. You're actually just burning, the stores are already there. But that's the eternal question, is how do you manage that, isn't it?
I suppose, Chris, that what you're saying is that this was a kind of a phenomenon that you hadn't experienced before in training. You'd been consuming these calories and they had been digesting and metabolizing and you had been topped up with energy, but just the way that it kind of went on that day, you just couldn't take on that fuel as you needed, and it wasn't maybe you weren't absorbing it through the stomach and all the rest of it. You weren't getting the energy that you were used to having, and then that obviously caused a huge amount of distress physically and psychologically and emotionally, as you had this huge task ahead of you.
Exactly. So that's where I've got something to go by, in that my previous 2 ultras this year, I'd felt really strong and was running as even splits throughout the race, and finished well, and my kind of 400 calorie per hour model seemed to be working. So having had some time to digest it, I've been thinking, why did this happen on this day? And there's only really one conclusion that I can come to, and this is where I think it's interesting and helpful to other people. I'd actually had quite a bit of stress in the run up to in literally the couple of days prior to the race. And if I'm honest with myself, the stress had been building, but I'd kind of been ignoring it. But then there was a straw that broke the camel's back. So the straw that broke the camel's back was a couple of days before the race. It was really bad timing, but I caught someone breaking into our garage, and they were in our garden. They'd broken into our garage in the middle of the night, dressed in balaclava, and then I caught them walking across my garden, going towards the shed, and I kind of banged on the window, scared them. They ran away. So the rational part of my brain is on the spectrum of things, I know this could have been much worse. But then the irrational part of your brain kind of think, God, someone was in my garden. Were they going to get into my house? I've got kids. I'm leaving my family for a couple of days to go on this silly run. And I was thinking about it all night when I was camping at the start line. So I was just nervous, but not for the race. I was really well prepared for the race. I was actually really excited about it, but I was nervous for my kids and the house and all that stuff. So I think it was a sympathetic nervous system response. So when you go into fight flight mode, one of the things your body doesn't really want to be doing that much of when you're in fight flight mode is digesting. So the just breaking down some of the language of that, our autonomic nervous system is split into 2. We have our sympathetic nervous system and our parasympathetic nervous system. And the sympathetic is what we nickname the fight flight. And then the other side of that is the parasympathetic, we nickname the rest and digest. So the 2 ends of the spectrum that I kind of tell my patients about is your sympathetic end of the spectrum is when a tiger jumps out the grass, all you need is your blood and your muscles. You need to run away as fast as you can. Once you've just finished your Christmas dinner though, and you're so fat and you're sitting on the sofa and you can barely even lift the TV remote, you're so tired, that's the end of the spectrum, rest and digest. You can't move. And normally we're kind of somewhere in the middle of that. But lifestyle and events and kind of health habits can push us one way or the other too far. So I think I was just too far in my sympathetic system because of that break-in, and so it was just really bad timing, bad luck. And the thing where I think where this can be helpful though is one of the reasons I wanted to do such a big challenge from the very beginning, I'd always recognized that lots of elements of your life have to come together. And this was just a really clear representation of when your life is unbalanced, it means that you can't perform. And this is happening even at lower levels when we're not trying to run 100 miles. But I think big challenges like this highlight how our life is going. They're an expression of how your life is going in lots of different realms. And I'm not looking back at all questioning my training. I can hand on heart say I stuck to the plan. I felt fit enough to run 100 miles, and I thought that my training had gone well. My nutrition strategy, I do believe, was right. I tested it a couple of times. It was good. It was right for me, at least. Pacing strategy, had that down, but my head was not in the right place. And it then meant that my physical body couldn't do what it was capable of. And I just find that really interesting.
And as you say,
I find that, I was going to say, I find that interesting when you were saying there about the sympathetic and parasympathetic, because if you're in a sympathetic state, if you're sprinting or something like that, it's probably quite a good thing, isn't it? Because it's over and it's over quickly. So you need, like, the stress will help you through. But for something like a long distance run, you want to be able to keep going. So you don't want to be in that panic.
No, it's like when people say, "Oh, adrenaline will get you through," and I'm like, no. You need to try and like breathe and not let adrenaline take over, because this is a long challenge. Adrenaline's great in a fight or a sprint or running away from a tiger, but you don't want it for 24 hours.
So when you bring that into a lifestyle type of thing, like you say, in someone's normal everyday life, like you've just said about diet, pick the diet that works for you, not a diet, but you know what I mean, the kind of food strategy that works for you in everyday life, say. And it's the same with like your exercise choice, isn't it? Because some people love to just beast themselves all day, like, that's what they do, and they go like, right, that's it, because I've burned as many calories as possible. But you're going to be in that state more, in that sympathetic state more, so then the rest and digest thing doesn't happen, and that's when people are like, well, I can't eat properly and I've got gut issues and all of this sort of stuff. So it's just, I mean, I'm going off on a tangent there, but it's like that. It just made me think of all that, and it's really interesting because these things have a massive impact on people's results, and and you're a really good example of that, because you know exactly what you're doing, and it still affected you. So
yeah,
that's really interesting.
I tried. I saw you post the other day, James, about pumping iron, and you watched it 100 times, and so have I. And I was trying to use Arnold Schwarzenegger's strategy, where he was saying, if someone steals my car outside, I just let them take it. And and I was like, I was trying to channel my inner Arnold Schwarzenegger, but I'm not Arnold Schwarzenegger. I care too much about my family, and it just got into my head. And
and it sounds on a physical level as well, like you said, with the parasympathetic and things, that you probably the 2 nights leading up to this, you weren't sleeping well after this happened. So it's that kind of, you weren't getting that rest and digest in terms of your sleep was probably really broken, because and understandably, someone's kind of broken into your property, and so you're not sleeping well for 2 nights leading up to the biggest endurance endeavor of your life, just on a physical level. That's going to have a big impact, the lack of sleep, isn't it?
Yeah. And it hasn't. I really want to try again, and in trying again, I'm just going to come at it from maybe just deal a little bit more with just life. And when I said earlier that, if I'm honest with myself, the stress had been building, I don't think I was necessarily training in a sustainable way. And I do also think that's fine for a while. We can take on big challenges in training, in business, in just life in general. But I'm a big fan of Simon Sinek's model of the infinite game, and little sprints are okay. but I felt my fatigue levels rising, and my work has been quite busy. We've had quite a lot going on, all good, positive stuff, but work's been busy. Trying to run do a 100-mile training plan, it just requires lots of time. So fitting it in, I've been doing like 4:30 in the morning runs and after work runs, and just squeezing it all in. And gradually I kind of felt this fatigue level rising. And like I say, I could have coped with that. I felt like I was there for the 100-miler, and I knew that once the 100 was done, I was going to then drop my training volume, try and just have a slightly more, in quote, balanced life after the 100. But then this extra thing came along, and I was sailing close to the wind anyway, and then this extra thing came along. And so what it's made me reflect on is I really want to do another big challenge. The 100-mile thing is it's a bucket list thing for me. I want to achieve it. But I've realized, maybe if I want to do it, I should try and figure out a sustainable model in life where I'm not getting up at 4:30 in the morning to go for runs and get 18 miles in before breakfast. Like, actually, that's pretty stupid. And so I need to come up with a sustainable way. We're not all Jocko Willink or David Goggins.
What is your training volume? What was your training volume, say, not necessarily in the peaking phase, but on average, kind of how did you schedule your week? Did you train based on the allocated time you had in your diary, or did you train based on mileage? Or both?
It was kind of a training plan that was based around time running rather than miles running.
Yeah.
But it wasn't necessarily reverse engineered from the amount of time I had free in my week. I had to create that time from somewhere, which is where over time I don't think it would be sustainable. I was running 6 days a week, and I was doing 2 strength sessions a week, so doing eight sessions a week. The 6 days of running was split into 3 easy runs of about an hour, and then 1 easy run, but that gradually got longer. So when we were talking last time about zone 2, I would say with zone 2, it's never the intensity that makes it difficult, but it can be the distance. So I had 1 long run a week, which became difficult. That ended up being kind of 4, 5, 6 hours of 1 run a week, just gradually building up. And then the 2 runs that were left one was tempo, known as a tempo run, which was done as an interval base, but long intervals. So tempo is kind of high zone 3, and I would do 15, 18-minute tempo intervals. So I do, say, a warm up in zone 2, and then 15 minutes at zone 3, little rest, another 15 minutes at zone 3, little rest. And then the final run was much shorter, sharper intervals, either top of zone 4 or even dipping into zone 5. So they would be anywhere between 30 seconds to 2-minute intervals, but very intense with shorter rests.
I suppose I've been deep diving into Mike Mensa at the moment, and one of the interesting things he says, like, we can all agree that if more equaled better, then we'd all be training for 24 hours a day to try and get the best results. So we all acknowledge at some point in the day or some point in the training, we have to stop. So then for his central question is, well, what is the most I can get and the minimum output? And he was purely a bodybuilder. So it's a very different training system. It's a very different response from the body. It's purely about growing muscles and creating the aesthetics, not necessarily even about strength. And so he boiled it down to like a 30-minute workout, 3 to 4 times. I know Dorian Yates used to train for about 40.
Dorian Yates was the same.
Yeah, 45 minutes for 4 times a week for him. And obviously they had a lot of additional chemical help, but they were kind of freaks among freaks, and you still had to work damn hard to get that. But the thing is like at some point it's trying to work out what is going to get the stimulus to get the result, but at the same time takes into account the actual finite recovery that you have, because the energy has to be, what I'm very aware of doing kettlebell sport, that it's inherently very anaerobic, but is kind of strength endurance. And so on one hand, I have to have the strength to do the task, which is moving the bells. I have to be strong enough to do that, but I also need to be able to be conditioned enough to do the duration. And so I know that my energy is being split between building the strength and the conditioning element. And whereas a bodybuilder is just about how do I grow the muscle? So for you, as a purely on the other side of the spectrum, which is completely endurance, I suppose an interesting question is like, what is going to get you the stimulus to allow you to run the 100 miles, but at the same time recover enough to live a life, so you're not like, because we've all done those training periods where we're just knackered at the weekends, we can't function, but we did the training.
I love this. I love kind of this topic, but you can apply it to anything, can't you? Like, what's the minimum you need to do to get the maximum return, and then stop doing anything after that. In endurance running, I have a feeling that the focus will change depending on your experience. So as a newbie, say, if we hang on a sec, where should I start? Last year, when I first got into it, when I was training for my first ever ultra, my main priority was, and I think was correct to be, building an aerobic base. So lots of zone 2 running and building up the ability to just run for hours. But now I have that ability to run for hours, maybe my focus should be different. And you hear this a lot when you listen to podcasts of elite ultra runners. I'm never going to be elite, but when you listen to these top people, they say the biggest shift came in their running when they started to focus more on strength. But if you read between the lines, if a brand new ultra runner is thinking, oh, cool, I can just keep going with my strength program. If someone's trying to transition from, say, being someone who goes to the gym a lot and does lots of weight training, and then they think, oh, cool, this ultra running stuff sounds fun, I'm going to go do it. And then they hear an elite person say, oh, I've started throwing in 3 or 4 weightlifting sessions a week, and that's really helped me. But the person who's already doing 3 or 4 weightlifting sessions a week thinks, oh, okay, if I just do a run or 2 a week, I'm doing the same as them. But they're not, because they haven't built up the aerobic base. So I think now my focus probably should be to go back to a bit more strength training, maybe even focus on a little bit of mindset stuff, because I've been so busy. Something that really helped me previously in my life was daily meditation. That's kind of gone out the window a little bit recently. I just haven't had the time or energy, but maybe managing my mind would be an important thing to bring back in. And I should, now that I've got an aerobic base, I could literally just go and run a marathon right now. That's no problem. I need to have the other things to carry me through and have that holistic view. That's where
sorry, James.
So I was just going to say, I think it was after we spoke last time, but we may have spoke about it on the podcast maybe last week. I can't remember off the top of my head. I listened recently to Mark Allen, who was the 5 times Hawaii Ironman champion. He was trained by Phil Maffetone, who's on the podcast next week with us again. But just what you were saying there. So he's now 65 years of age, and he was looking back on his career, and he's now got more into strength training as he's got older and retired from competitive ultra endurance kind of events. And he said, similar to what you just said there, that he wishes he could go back now to when he was racing and do strength work, because he never used to do any of it, and I don't think any, or very, very little. But he had this huge aerobic base, because he was saying that he built up the ability to run with the math method, very low heart rate at kind of 5.5 minute miles. And he obviously was an Ironman athlete. So it's really interesting. But like you say, he had that massive aerobic base. Then to add strength on top of that is something else. But I think if you're talking about 100-mile races, the mindset stuff, I think, that you've just mentioned, you obviously need the aerobic base there, and you obviously need the physical conditioning to be able to do it. But at a certain level, you can't really train to run 100 miles, can you? It's the mind that takes you that distance, and the body just kind of holds on, but the body kind of holds itself together, and the mind makes you keep going for that distance. So yeah, I think strength and mindset is probably massive, for going forwards. Sorry, Paul, you were going to say?
Well, I was just going to say, it reminds well, you guys will know because you've read most of Pavel's books. And I can't remember which one it is. If it's Naked Warrior or Powdered People or Simple Sinners. I think it's Naked Warrior or Powdered People or something. Well, anyway, there's a guy in there which he talks about who routinely runs 100-mile races, but he does 2 training sessions of strength a week with a 24-kilo kettlebell, just pull-ups, press-ups, snatches, things like that, and then does a massively long run at the weekend where he would just do one huge race because he knew he had the capacity to do it, and then he would just stick in. He never mentions who it is, so I don't know any background on it, but it did strike me that once you've built the capacity, a bit like stretching, once you've built the range of motion, it's just about keeping that capacity alive by dipping into it, and then allowing you to work on like maybe different areas of weaknesses that allow you to just then really capitalize on any and really up the pace at some point.
A phrase I like and I use a lot with my patients is, it's so much easier to maintain a function than to gain a function. So once you have a function, you can actually just keep it ticking along. So I think I'm going to use a similar model to what you just said, where I've got this base. I'm not going to be running 6 days a week now. But I will do 1 long run a week and 1 or 2 runs during the week. But I've got that functions of aerobic base, so I can maintain it relatively easily. But what I don't have right now is strength. I've let that go. So I'm going to start increasing my level of weightlifting, and I'll maintain that through to next year. I've got an ultra next year, which is in the mountains, so I need strength anyway. So this is going to be I call it my fun experiment. I love doing these things. You get to experiment on yourself, see what works. So my next block will be more strength focused while trying to maintain and keep the aerobic base ticking over. But to gain something, you do have to put the days per week in. You're trying to change not just your physical structure, but your brain and nervous system. So that is like learning the skill. So I now need to relearn the skill of being strong, build the movement map in my body neurologically, and builds the different muscle fibers in my tissues. And that doesn't happen on 1 or 2 days a week. That happens 3-4 days a week. So I'm shifting focus, trying to gain a function, maintain the base. I talk about this with my patients where I don't do that much stretching, but if they're in a position where they really need to change their mobility, I'm like, well, you're going to have, this is not going to happen on 1 or 2 days a week. You need to gain this function. Once you've got it, you can chill out again, but you need to gain this function, and that happens 4+ days a week. And you just need to focus for a while, and then you'll be fine. You can tick along again.
That's great, because you've just reminded me of what you said in the last podcast. It's interesting what you've just said there, because we had Tom Morrison on a couple of weeks ago talking about mobility, the mobility method. And you said you'd seen him a load all over Facebook and everything. He's everywhere, isn't he? But and I'd said on that podcast, I don't do that much mobility work these days because I did loads of it after I finished my office job. I did loads of it because I needed to, but then I got to the point where I needed to focus on strength after that because I had mobility, but I couldn't control it. And what you said in your last episode, Chris, was great. Was about, and it's not just elite athletes, is it? But you were saying about the elite athletes who get to the point where they've got the aerobic foundation, but they can't do that much training at that level because their body can't actually mechanically handle it. And that's just because they're like so elite, I suppose. Whereas, and I'm not saying you're not elite, because to me you are, but to them you're not, right? And you said it yourself earlier.
Don't worry, I don't take offense. I'm definitely not elite.
But you're at that point, aren't you? It sounds like where you've, like you said, you've got that foundation. So now you just need to build the mechanical, what do you call it? Mechanical structure behind that aerobic foundation.
So something else I said last time was, a good ultra runner isn't necessarily the fastest runner, but it's the person who slows down the least. The sort of time goals I'm hoping to achieve, I'm not going to be running fast. I'm going to be running, to run a sub 2400 miler, I think works out to be about 14 minutes a mile. So that's not fast. That's the one I did with quite hilly terrain, but still 14 minutes a mile, that's manageable. But how do you still do 14 minutes a mile, 90 miles in? That's the question. So you don't necessarily, if we imagine kind of the graph of aerobic capacity improving, my graph is now slowing down in its growth, but I've probably got enough of an aerobic base to make me run 14 minutes a mile, 90 miles in. But maybe it's the strength and the mindset that needs to be more of a focus.
I think on that day as well, I don't know if people, I certainly spoke to a number of people on the day that you were running, because I was working that day. And like you say, at that time, I mean, we've gone on now to have, because it was about 3 weeks ago, I think, wasn't it?
It was two weeks ago Saturday, so not even 2 weeks ago.
Okay, so we had, it was the sort of start of this really nice hot run we've had, and at the time it was like the hottest day, I think, of the year. And I taught a spinning class at like 9 a.m. and I spoke to a couple of the guys afterwards, because we were all drenched, you know, and we had the doors wide open, and it was, and we kind of said, God, I said, Chris is running this 100 miles today, you know, and he started at 6 o'clock in the morning, and this is the worst possible day I could think of to, you know, to run. So, I mean, you also had, I know you had the kind of emotional, sort of psychological stuff going on, affecting the nervous system, but obviously that heat as well does. I don't know if you felt that had an effect, or if that was just another kind of, you know.
What it felt like to me was that the heat compounded an existing problem, but it wasn't the problem. From the very beginning, as soon as I took on calories, I was like, this doesn't feel right. I don't feel right. And you hope to come out the other side. You do go through waves. So at first I wasn't worried that I didn't feel right. I expected to feel good soon. And it just never came. So, and then obviously the heat really compounded. I mean, the race on that day, the race organizers, which they've been running this race for 20 odd years or so, they had their highest DNF rate they've ever had. The heat did get to people, and I'm sure it compounded my problem, but it wasn't the primary. It was a compounding factor. So again, it kind of leaves me with lots of questions. I'd love to know how I would have got on if my head was in a better place, maybe. But
but you said as well, mechanically, like the next day you woke up and you know, I would expect, and I know just from running, you know, marathons myself, and you ran 20 miles further than a marathon on that day, even with all this stuff going on, that, you know, I get blisters, or you get a little aches in the ankle or the knee or the hip or something, but physically you felt okay, and you woke up the next day and you weren't in agony anywhere. You didn't have any. So mechanically, it sounds like you actually held together pretty well for the 46 miles. Yeah,
and I was completely fine. And what was annoying was I could feel that in the race. I felt like my physical body was okay. I felt horrendous, but it was a physiological horrendousness rather than a physical horrendousness. Because I've had that before. I've had the physical horrendousness in my first ultra, where I wasn't conditioned as much as I am now. I went out with the wrong strategy, the wrong race and nutrition strategy. That absolutely beat me up physically. I know what that feels like. This wasn't that. And my previous two races this year, I felt actually really good. Lots of questions around how this could have gone. The thing I keep coming back to was probably my headspace. So next year when I try it again and do other races, my two goals will be to have the whole training block with a slightly more holistic view, in that have it as a sustainable thing where I'm not trying to burn the candle a little bit with work and training, try and figure out work. Can I take some time out of work so that I can train more without it stressing me out? And this is another reason why I like these big challenges, because they get you asking big questions about how you structure your whole life. It is so much more than zone 2 training and aerobic bases. It is your work and how you manage that with your family, and all of these things have to come together. So I'm going to try and come at it from a sustainable model where I can just I'm not burning out, and I can keep going, while also factoring in some strength and factoring in some mindset and some meditation. And it's actually quite complicated as I'm talking about it. There's lots of things that need to come together.
And what have you signed up for? What's the you said you've already signed up for one next year. What distance is the next one that you're going for?
The next race that I actually have paid for is in May, and that's 65 miles around Snowdonia, hitting 8 peaks. So that will be probably a 22-hour effort. It has, I think, about 7,000 meters of elevation gain in the 65 miles. That will be a solid run. So that will be a 5 a.m. start, finishing probably about 2 or 3 a.m. in the mountains. That'll be physical. And I'm just starting to get the itch to start looking for 100-mile races around September next year. So I'll have a few months off after Snowdonia, and then try maybe have another attempt at 100 miles. But for the rest of this year, I'm just going to take it easy and get strong again, going to gain that function, maintain my base, but gain a new function of 4 days a week or more of strength training.
Because I know that the furthest you've ran to date is 52 miles, I think you said.
Mm-hmm.
And at this last attempt, you got to 46. So I think 65 is, because there's definitely a kind of a massive psychological background to this sort of stuff, isn't there? And I know you'd ran about 50, and we kind of laughed last time when it was like, well, if you can run 50, you can run 100. But I think psychologically, if you know you've done 65 and it's a mountain run as well.
Yeah, there's a big difference.
I mean, that must be the equivalent of 65 on a mountain run, must be the equivalent of probably like 80 on a non-mountain run, if you like, something exactly. A bit flatter. Yeah.
I'm starting to think of it in time terms more than distance terms. So if that takes me 22, 23 hours, that will be similar to 100 miles because there's the element of just going into the night. And particularly in somewhere like Snowdonia, I've raced there twice, and both of my races have finished about 6-ish p.m. So you hang around, you have kind of some food, and you're chatting to other runners, and gradually the sun starts to set, and you're looking at the mountains behind you, and they just look like these monsters. And you see these little dots of people up on the summits, and you think, oh, that's actually quite scary. So I'm going to be that person next year when the sun's setting. I'll be up in the mountains. So having 22, 23 hours under my belt in somewhere as daunting as Snowdonia, I think that, like you say, psychologically, that will give me a big boost. So any 100-milers in flatter terrain will feel very, very manageable.
So what do you think, as we start to kind of wrap up, what are your big takeaways, I suppose, from the experience that you had? I mean, we've discussed obviously the physical takeaways that you've gone away and you've reassessed and established, well, I'm going to spend more time, on strength and on mindset and things like that. But I know that before we started recording, you said that it kind of hit you quite, I suppose, emotionally, or, to your core a little bit, not hitting the goal. How have you kind of processed it, and what are you taking away from this adventure that you went on that didn't quite go according to plan?
So the thing that I'm pleased with, the things that I'm pleased with, I'm not sitting here questioning my training. And I think that has helped me. Now that I'm out the little slump that I had for a few days after the race, I'm not sitting here questioning my training. And that's just a lesson that if you do put the work in, although I did have a little slump for a couple of days, I'm over it now. And if you do put the work in, you don't sit there questioning the work. And this is something that can apply to anything, into your business life and your training. Like, I'm pleased that I'm not looking back questioning that, because that would grind at me more. So going forwards, as long as I have a plan and I stick to it and I do the work, actually the outcome is the outcome. It doesn't always feel like it. A couple of days after I was in a slump, but now with a bit of space between it, that's exactly what happened. I did the work and it didn't go my way. The outcome was the outcome. And I keep, in terms of what I've learned as well, is I keep coming back to that word sustainable. I'm trying to think now, I enjoy this stuff. I want to be doing it for a long time. How can I build a life where I can do it in a way that doesn't burn me out? And that will involve questions around how I run my business and how much I work. And it's actually a very big question that has to incorporate lots of elements of life. So that's probably my biggest take home from this.
Because there's Conor McGregor's coach Kavanagh, said that I think he actually had a book out called, and it was called we win or we learn, and he's having that kind of, and it sounds like you're searching for answers from it, but you've you've really kind of taken on board. Like you say, you did all you could in that event, and you learn what you learn as a result of it, and you're going to take that forward. And I think that is, and I was having a conversation with a member earlier, and I said you were coming back on, and I think it's really valuable for people to hear things like this, where, because so much, certainly on social media and on TV and documentaries, a lot of the time you see things, everything goes right, or there's this big triumph and this big happy ending at the end. And there will be a happy ending at the end of, the next one or whatever. But this is just this is a stepping stone on the path, isn't it? And I think it's really important for people to realize and to see and to hear you talking so openly, honestly, eloquently, and to review what happened, and to know that sometimes you can do everything right in preparation, and for whatever reason, it just doesn't quite go your way. And then it's actually how you, like you say, you mope around for a couple of days, and then you dust yourself off and you decide to go again, which I think is hugely admirable.
On that point about social media and everything going right, I think that played a little role in why I felt destabilized. I use the word destabilized. That's how I felt after it, because we do these big challenges to find out who we are, and then you don't achieve it, so you start to go, oh, who am I? And I felt destabilizing. And social media is great. I'd been kind of trying to boost my mindset by listening to people like David Goggins. But then when I quit, I've got David Goggins' head in my voice, I've got David Goggins' voice in my head going, don't quit. Suffering is a choice. And so I'm like, damn it, I'm not up to this. And it made me feel really bad. And so it is such a double-edged sword. We can learn from amazing people who have done amazing things, but then we can feel inferior because of these amazing people who have done amazing things, when actually it was the right decision. I'm not David Goggins. I'm not here to drill myself absolutely into the ground. I just wanted to survive that day. I was actually there to have fun, really. And it just got to a point where it was definitely not fun and probably dangerous to go on. So I made the right decision, but I felt inferior because of all these amazing people that do help me. They do help. I do learn from them. But then we've got to be careful that we don't kind of try and live up to what they do, because they're them, we're us.
I always find that really interesting, because everything you've just said all the way through this podcast is, how do you balance this all out so you can work and you can do what you want to do and all of that. So not that you don't want to work, but you know what I mean? You can do this as well. And it's like, just using David Goggins as an example, would you want his life? You know what I mean? It's like, I watch his stuff and I'm like, it's very inspirational, everything, but I wouldn't want to be him.
Absolutely.
We'll start to wrap up there, Chris, because I know we need to wrap up soon. But thank you so much for coming on and talking with us again. That's been really, really interesting. And like I think it might have been before we started recording, I can't remember, but very often when we do something and it all goes right, we don't really do an autopsy on it and pick it apart as much as when we do something and it doesn't go right, or it doesn't go how we plan. So that's why I like that, we win or we learn, because very often we don't learn much from when we win. We learn more from when we don't win, which is, so thank you so much for coming on and talking to us. It's fascinating, and we'll definitely speak to you again. Do you know what I mean? Especially maybe after the 65 in Snowdon would be great. I mean, Snowdonia would be amazing to kind of keep in touch on this journey that you're on, and see how the next one goes. That'd be fantastic. Paul, anything you'd like to say as we wrap up?
I think maybe we need to pick Phil's brains when he comes on and say, like, what is the least you can do once you've developed the base? What is the very least that someone can do to maintain performance? See what he comes up with.
I'd love to know the answer to that for sure.
Yeah, and Chris also had another question, which we'll ask Phil next week as well, around the math method as well. So that'll be great. And also maybe what music can you listen to boost your CNS and all the rest of it from his new book that he's doing, which we'll talk a lot about, I'm sure. You were going to say something, Paul?
No, I was just holding the mic.
Okay, I thought you were moving it towards the mouth to talk.
No, I'll do this from now. Bring your face to the camera.
Pete, anything as we wrap up?
Yeah, just the thing of setting setting a goal, but then realizing what it takes to get to it. So, it's not just like set a goal and then smash yourself, get to it, and then like achieve it or not. But then you might achieve something, and then it's like, well, what happens next? So it's a really interesting approach of setting a goal that is beyond what you can actually do, and then just doing what you need to do to get there, but realizing that there's many, many different parts to it. So the mindset and the nutrition and the fact that you've got a life and all of that, and fitting all of that around it, and it's still achievable. So it'll possibly take longer in that respect, but it's also something that you can fit your lifestyle around as well. So I love that, because a lot of people trying to force stuff, and instead of that, you're just putting in a little bit of effort here and there, a little bit more. Maybe he's put in a bit too much somewhere, and then it's like, right, so now you're going to do a step back and move your effort somewhere else, and then it'll all come together at some point on some magical day, won't it? So I think it's just a great approach. And it's the longevity approach, isn't it? Let's face it.
It's hopefully going to be sustainable, and actually longevity is an interest of mine, health and longevity, and that's why I have no intentions of ever becoming elite. I want to do this in a way where I can still maintain some strength and not push myself too hard, and hopefully that carries over into later life, where I can still have these adventures but be healthy with it as well, without having beaten myself up too much. So it's a big puzzle, a big fun puzzle.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Chris, for coming back on. That's really, really good and really interesting. And like I say, we definitely, hopefully, if just a quick reminder for people, Chris, where they can follow you on social media and things if they want to.
So Instagram and YouTube would be best. My Instagram is Chris_Branch_. And if on YouTube you type in Chris Branch, you'll find me.
Excellent. Yeah, because I'm sure people will be interested. Like we say, we will keep in touch and we will follow you on your journey towards this. Because I think when you do nail this 100 miles down the line, it's going to be, it's going to be so worth it. And what a story to tell, the journey that you've had to get there. So fantastic. So thank you so much, everybody, for listening. Thank you to Pete. Thank you to Paul. Thank you to Chris. We will be back next week for episode 150 with Phil Maffetone, who will be returning, who we've spoke about on this podcast today, and we've spoke to him previously. He's going to be back on with us next week. And then we go into a run of guests, including Becca Roberts, current UK strongest woman, Dan Johns coming back on. We're going to have Alex Salkin on. We've got lots of people lined up in the next sort of 3 or 4 weeks. So we will speak to you soon. Please do like, share, subscribe, leave a review if you're listening or watching on a platform that allows you to do so. Please do find us on Instagram and give us a follow. Subscribe to us on YouTube. And we will see you next week for episode 150. Until then, bye-bye.
You've been listening to Health Odyssey with Peter Lant, Paul Bassett, and James St. Pierre. To get your regular fix of hype-free health, you can subscribe and leave a review wherever you get your favorite podcasts. You can find out more on today's and other topics at healthodyssey.com, or find us on Facebook or Instagram by searching for Health Odyssey.